Hello, everybody. How you doing? Noah Richardson here, doing Goa Trance side trance reviews from back in the day. Thanks to everybody who subscribed and commented. If there's ever anything that you'd like me to talk about, just let me know in the comment section. So today I want to talk about a group who is one of the staples of Goa. They're absolutely one of the staples of Goa. And I've talked about them kind of a bit of the negative in the recent past in some of my videos, but that really it just refers to where they've gone after their heyday of definitive music and after the ending of the Goa movement in terms of like real definitive Goa melodic trance in the mid to late 90s. I've kind of ripped on them a little bit. Again, this is just in terms of where they've gone after Goa was over, because they're one of the groups who they were such a popular group and had such a huge influence and following on a lot of listeners and other producers that I guess it just seemed like they would, maybe it just seemed to them like they would just keep their sound going, kind of keep it moving, do what they've been doing, do what they've been known for, and just continue and persist with that endeavor. And in a way, I can't really blame them for that because they were so distinctive. Well, one of the more distinctive groups to do the music that they've done. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Astral Projection. And I want to talk about this album. I want to talk about Dancing Galaxy. So, the three people involved in Astral Projection are Lior, Perlmutter, Avi Nissim, and Yaniv Haviv. Sorry if I botched those names. I apologize. It was either all three or just two of each member on subsequent albums. This album is Lior and Avi, and Yaniv didn't appear on it. Hey, dude. How are you?
Yeah.
Making a video here. So, go eat your chips. Hi. Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. I love you. That's Henry. He's my big boy. 13. Gotta love that kid. I mean, talk about a love child. I mean, he is like love child. All right, so he just wanted to come check on me and make sure that I wasn't talking to the mailman. I don't know. This album is Lior and Avi, okay? And subsequent albums have had either all three or just Lior and Avi, oddly enough. This came out, this is Transient Records in 1997. Recorded, it says actually here on the back, between October 96 and June 1997. So they were working on this when, at least when the first two albums were released. So however, maybe they had a big discography of things all at the time, and decided to put this or that or the other on each subsequent album. I don't really know, but I'd always like to pay attention to dates. When you're a serious collector, you pay attention to release dates, catalog numbers, year, and who worked on it. And that's even how I used to arrange my records. I was sort of like a super nerd about it. I used to catalog my records by catalog number, by year, at least those two ways are a really great way to, look at how not only a label has evolved, but also, each artist on subsequent labels have evolved too. So, I have like all my Blue Rooms in a row, and you could see, all my transients in a row, my tips in a row, things like that. So the first two albums were both released in 1996, The Astrophiles and Trust in Trance. We had all three members on those two albums, Lior, Avi, and Yaniv. Dancing Galaxy came out in '97, Another World in '99, Unmixed in 2000, and Amen in 2002. So, Astrophiles and Trusted Trance are the heaviest ones. They're very busy. They're melodic. They're very deep, but they're not like. It's kind of hard to explain. It's like this is deep too, but it's not deep like those ones are. Those ones, the tracks are really very kind of, in my opinion, they're just sort of overly complex. And I would say the same with Another World too. I felt like Another World is when I stopped listening to them, because when I got Another World, I thought, there was only one or two tracks on there that really stood out to me. And I quit listening to them after that because it was just too much. They were just sort of, their cup overfloweth with sound. And they were really pushing the envelope with how much music and how much sound they could jam in there, And with it not being psychedelic trance and it being Goa trance, every genre has a threshold. Absolutely. Every genre has a threshold, and you can jam as much music as you can possibly jam into an album or into a track. And even if your production is really good and you have top-notch production and mastering, it's still gonna be obvious if there's too much music in a track or in an album as a whole collectively. Astrophiles, Trusted Trance, and Another World to me are good albums, but they just seemed like they took it just a little too far with how much music they were jamming into those albums. Like I said, all three members were on Astrophiles and Trusted Trance. Just Lior and Avi were on Another World, and you've got Boris Blen and Yaniv on a couple of tracks on Another World. And Boris Blen is known for his really heavy Goa sound, and maybe at some point I'll get to him. On this one, though, this is just Lior and Avi, right? And this is the one that works out the best for them. This is, I would say, the reason I'm talking about this in the first place is because it's definitive astral projection, if you ask me. And why is it definitive astral projection? I would say is because it is the most cohesive, it's the most ubiquitous, and their most humble album, in that there's really nothing pretentious about this album, in my opinion. The music that's in this album there isn't a whole lot of music and sound jammed into each track like I feel like there have been in the aforementioned albums. This one is simplistic. It's satisfying. It works really well. It's the less is more one, right? It's the most melodic without being too hard. It's every track is very driving except for the Disco Valley ambient Galaxy mix at the end of it. But I mean, it doesn't exceed the boundaries of melodic Goa trance. It says everything it needs to say in each track, and it says it very well. And each track is a little bit different, but the same. And their other albums did that too. After Another World came out, and they went right back to the very heavy, laden Goa sound. That was 1999, and Goa was on its way out. But it was just, I remember I really wanted to like it, but there was just so much going on that it just took away from the simplicity of it. And I always kept going back to this one. The first AP album I ever bought was the Astrophiles, and I remember it blew my head off of my neck because I had never really heard them before. And hearing a whole album of it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. But this one, though, when I heard this one, this was, in my opinion, it didn't get any better than this. And just for a moment, I'd like to give a shout out to Marlon Kamosi, also known as the Goa Constrictor, who ran a record store it was either Eugene or Portland, or maybe both, I can't remember. But at the time, I lived in Eugene, Oregon, and he personally came over to my house and sold this to me. So Merlin, I still have this. Thank you, Goa Constrictor. If you're out there, I know you're out there. Thank you. I still have it. I hope you're doing well, man. So I may or may not kind of go into each track one by one, but I kind of will. Kind of, kind of a concept album in terms of that flow and that narrative that goes in terms of energy and in terms of musicality goes sort of, on a pattern or on a curve. You know what I mean? Starting out with a track like Dancing Galaxy, with those distinctive Dune samples, right away it grabs you, and it's going to be something special. And Dancing Galaxy is a gorgeous track. It's a great, simple, gorgeous track. It's a great way to start off this album, To me, I would say, the standouts on this album would be Dancing Galaxy, Sound Form, Cosmic Ascension, and Liquid Sun. And the ones that are in between are good. They're very good. They go from a little bit darker, but not dark. And some of them kind of harken back to their old classic sound, but still, they're not jamming a whole bunch of music and a whole bunch of lead synth lines that just sort of like bang on your head, in terms of, and to try to get the sequencing melody, across. They're not doing that in this album. Like I said, this is a very less is more album, Sound Form has that great, around 5 minutes in, has that great synth lead, the Goa synth leads with those minor notes, and everything, and the staccato stuff that they do, really, like that's trippy, but like they're not jamming it into your head, Tracks like Cosmic Ascension is just unreal, That's like it's like the other Mahadeva, it's another track that's got that very high ohm factor, It keeps the interest and vibe going, like the peak track on this album is Cosmic Ascension, and that one in particular could have been just jam full of sound, but it wasn't. And it was this less is more simplistic thing, with that ohm factor into it. And just, I loved it, and I still love it to this day. This whole album, I love almost everything on it. Flying into a Star, Life on Mars, a bit dark, but still very driving, but not complicated, This is pure melodic Goa without the cheese. This isn't the doof cheese. This isn't the typical Goa cheese that you hear in a lot of things. This is straight up melodic Goa trance, And, in my opinion, the absolute reason to get this album in the first place was Liquid Sun. Liquid Sun is just unparalleled melodic Goa. It's so uplifting, and the melodies are so beautiful, and it's very simple, and it's very moving. It has one of the best bass lines I have ever heard in a Goa track. The bass line in the Liquid Sun track is just amazing. And it's a complicated bass line, but it works so well. Everything complements each other. All the pieces, the soundscapes, the effects, the lead synths, the bass lines, the accompanying things, the call and the response, all that stuff is going on in this album, and it works so well, and this is the album of theirs that worked out the best, and there was hits on every album, Astrophiles had hits on it like Enlightened Evolution and Zero and other ones. Trust in Trance had ones. Last I heard a long time ago, their favorite track was on Trust in Trance, and it was People Can Fly, I suppose. I never heard Unmixed, and I never heard Amen, and I didn't hear anything after Another World. Because when I heard Another World, it was, for me, I wanted more of this. and they spoiled us with this one. They absolutely spoiled us with this one. Um, because this one doesn't exceed the boundaries of melodic Goa trance like all the other ones do. I'm going to go ahead and say that they exceed the boundaries of melodic Goa because they just are jamming so much music into each one. They're not doing that on this album. This is the less is more one, and I don't know if people like this one the best, but I definitely did. And the reason I like it the best is because I feel like it's their definitive sound, you know. And again, I rip on them a lot for what they've sort of turned into. And, now I'm going to go ahead and confess and say that I kind of can't blame them for doing that because everybody else who was huge had to do something like that. And in order to keep a following, in the age of technology, you have to take your image, it seemed like, and make it simpler to understand for the way that technology has given us shorter attention spans and lower expectations. And that could be a whole other rant for another time. But collectively, I mean, you think about how fast information can get to you and how you can access things and how fast that happened. And, you look at the curve of how technology has, and storage and processing speed has all just, exponentially just shot through the roof in the past 20 years. Our expectations are they're very high, but they're very low. They're very high in terms of we want less faster and we want more faster, and quality is not a concern, and I think that's one of the symptoms that music has suffered over the years too. I don't want to stumble over my words here because I don't want to get off track, but at any rate, I mean, this album right here, I didn't really know too many people who didn't like it, and if you don't like this album, you probably just feel like you need more of that heavier, complicated melodic Goa. And this one might have just been too simple for people. But this one, for me, the fact that it was less is more gave a more depth to it to me. It indicated to me that it was, okay, so this is what we've been doing. This is what we want to say musically. And whenever you can say something that you take your craft and you can say it, you say what you need to say succinctly, and specifically, you don't need to use as many words, so to speak, or as much music or as much content to drive your point across. It's just like a book. If you ever read a book that is just so dry, or maybe it's just so academic, and it just reiterates the point, over and over and over, you get tired of it, I mean, I'm not to say that books like that don't are relevant or are of use, I mean, like, they definitely are, but if you can say what you need to say and say it clearly and say it skillfully and not run on with too much content, it's going to be easier for people to understand. It's going to be easier for you to get your point across and have your content understood. And that's what's going on with this album. That is absolutely what's going on with this album. Most cohesive, most, like I said before, ubiquitous album that they've ever put out. And I love it. I absolutely love it, and it's the one that I'm going to hang on to forever. I'm never going to let go of this album because it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, Liquid Sun will never get old to me. Cosmic Ascension will never get old to me. Dancing Galaxy will never get old. Soundform will never get old. This was more than 20 years ago, and it's still good. And a lot of these albums that I talk about, almost all these albums I've talked about are at least 20 years old. And it just goes to show how electronic music is really a futurist, had been in the past, had been a really futuristic pursuit, I mean, it's got a hedonistic following, but I don't know if the followers really understand the futuristic nature of the music, and when I say futuristic, what I mean is I might have talked about it before in terms of how it defines a time and how that definition can persist into the future and describe the past and also describe the future, in a way, without sounding dated. Will this kind of music ever sound dated? Would Coxbox Dragon Tales ever sound dated? That kind of stuff. Would this ever sound dated? I mean, this could sound dated. Yeah, it could, and the dated aspect of the sound probably is just due to the technology, because they don't make music the way they used to make music anymore. You can't make this shit with plugins, and on Pro Tools. It's not going to sound the same. And if you don't know how they made music like this back in the day, the way they did it was they had computers that ran sequencers, MIDI sequencers on them. And it was all, the MIDI chain came, the computer was the brain that told all the instruments what to do. And we're talking about synthesizers. You've got 17 synthesizers, you've got 3 or 4 drum machines, you've got samplers, you've got effects processors, and everybody's listening to the MIDI chain, right? You've got somebody running the board, the mixing board, right? And the computer is responsible for all the sequencing, all the bank changes, all the program changes, all the pattern changes. The computer is the brain that's telling all the gear what to do. This is not music that was made in a computer or in the box, And music that's made in the box can be good. It can be just fine. But that's not how it was made in 1995, 1996, 1997. Maybe some people could do it. I've heard music that was made with those things back in the day. There wasn't a whole lot that was available back then, but there was some things. But the majority of it was made with computer sequencers talking to MIDI and CV gear, and the computer sequencer told all the instruments what to say, when to say it. The people were tweaking the frequencies. Maybe they were adding chords or adding keys. They were pushing buttons, and it all ran into the mixer. Somebody was running the board, and then it was recorded. That's how they made this music. And, analog gear, analog and digital gear, doesn't sound like, like there's been a lot of good emulators, over time, like you look at the Arturia stuff, like Arturia makes a lot of really nice classic stuff, that's in the box. And it sounds good. It's emulators, though. It's not the real stuff, There's circuitry going on in these machines, and there's analog warmth, and it just isn't the same as it used to be, And you can make, and I think that's one of the downfalls of music, like electronic music like this, is because there was definitely a shift from gear, outboard MIDI CV gear, sequenced by a computer, to everything being sequenced in the computer, once you start doing that, it made sense that people would want to do that. Processors got better, RAM got bigger, hard drives got better. People were able to make, the advent of Pro Tools in 1990. People were starting to use that to master things and to actually mix. Probably not too much of this, but as the technology got better, it seemed like it was, it's obvious, like we could simplify this music. We could simplify the way we make this music into, we could have less stuff. We could have less Juno 106s and less Korg samplers and less Akais and less, pieces of outboard gear that have to be, routed in a MIDI or a CV chain. And it makes sense. You'd want to simplify, if you were an artist, an electronic music artist, you'd want to simplify your gear. What happened was I believe that the standardization or the consolidation of how the music was made was reiterated and could be heard in the kind of music that was brought to us. more simplistic in terms of how you could consolidate everything into one package to make the music to give you this, which is going to sound like where it came from. So that's what I want to say about that. And Astral Projection are still around, and they're still making music, and I'm not going to listen to any of it because I'm sorry, I don't like it. I don't find it interesting. I don't find it inspiring, and I don't find it innovative. And I talk about this a lot. I talk about how I just don't. There's a lot of these acts that are still going from the good old days. They're just chasing the dragon, really. And the parties aren't like they used to be. The parties weren't in the mid to late '90s. The parties weren't big. Maybe not until Boom or something. They were little parties. This was underground stuff. I remember, I was in high school when I heard this stuff, started listening to this stuff. Luckily I caught on to it, like right as it was really starting to take off. It was really hard to get this music. Nobody knew about it. Hardly anybody knew about it. Because it was very underground, I remember going to a Moon Tribe party in Eugene, Oregon, and under 100 people. Absolutely under 100 people. I'm listening to this amazing music being played, and hardly anybody was there. This wasn't London. This wasn't Britain. This is Eugene, Oregon, for crying out loud. So at any rate, Astral Projection. Let me grab it one more time for you. Astral Projection, Dancing Galaxy. If you haven't heard this, pick it up.